Oh, you described it beautifully, actually, about how if you shift your attention from me to whoever you're speaking to, it makes a big difference. When you're focused on what are people getting, are they finding it useful, how are they feeling, so the attention is on them, then you have no space for in your brain to worry about yourself. When I do my best talks or my best workshops, I almost forget that I'm there.
Mm,
It's like I've disappeared. And so I know it sounds really strange, but there
mm,
have been times that I've felt like I wasn't there. And that's
mm.
because my energy is so much with the group and about the group that at the end I go, oh, where was I? That's what you would call a flow state.
Megumi, I'm very excited and grateful to have you on the Core Impact podcast. After knowing about your work, honestly, I started asking myself, am I a calm person or should I call myself a calm person? I found it's not something easy to answer because it depends. But then I thought maybe it's not important to know or to define myself, but it's more important to focus on what can I take from this. For example, being present and purposeful. So what do you think about that?
It's an interesting thought about being calm because I think as a quieter person, there's two versions of it. One is the calm on the outside, but stressed out on the inside.
Mm,
And with my Japanese face, I can do that very well. So I can pretend to be calm on the outside, but really stressing out on the inside. But I think the more effective version of calm is when I'm calm on the inside and calm on the outside. So, and there's of course everything in between. And so, yeah, I think the trick here is can you be present, as you say, and find that calm because you're present. And
mm.
I certainly try to do that as much as I can because I think often when we go away from calm, it's because we worry about what we might have done in the past or we worry about something that's about to happen.
Mm, mm. I saw how much also you focus on being purposeful. So,
Oh,
what is your purpose or intention, let's say, of writing the book Quietly Powerful? And what would you wish for people who are reading them
mm.
to get from it? What transformation
Sure.
will they have?
So I have two reasons and purposes, if you like, for having written the book. One of the reasons is professional. So I have been working in leadership development and culture change kind of work with organizations for 20 plus years. And I love the work. I love the impact it can have. But as I was working in this field, I often felt like there was something missing. So part of it was because I'm quieter, I notice some of the lack of quieter leaders, but also I've worked with quieter leaders who have been amazing and I really enjoyed working with them. And I thought, why don't we talk much about that? And often we have this stereotypical strong leader of somebody who's quite outspoken and dominant and directive. And I just think there's something missing here that where we can have thoughtful, really good listening type leaders that can be very, very effective. And so from a professional perspective, I really want to challenge the notion of what great leadership looks like, because even though we talk about the need for empathy and the need for humility, integrity, all of those things, I think we still sometimes fall for the charisma, the confidence, the ones that seem really that we get drawn to. So I'm hoping part of it is about the organizations and senior leaders looking for future leaders to expand their definition of what good leadership looks, sounds, and feels like. So that will be one purpose. From a personal perspective, and I guess a purpose for individuals that read the book, my hope for those individuals who are quieter to find that they have their unique leadership strengths and
Mm,
that they don't discount it. So I've often thought about that personally as well. I've struggled with the fact that I was a little bit quieter and I felt like I was often on the margins or on the outer. So as a Japanese woman working in Australia, You can imagine that often I would be in the minority, so I didn't feel like I fitted the mold. And so that caused me to go a little bit quieter as well. And so I found
Mm,
it difficult to find my voice and be okay with being a bit different, or be okay with thinking about things differently and doing things differently in my own quieter way. And so for the individuals reading the book, I just hope that they can find their own unique voice, their own unique leadership approach, because they are just as valuable as the ones that we tend to value normally.
There is something here I'm curious to know about from you. You might tell me 1 to 3 main blind spots that leaders usually have when it comes to inclusion, or let's say including the voices and going beyond the obvious diversity markers. So you
Hmm.
talked about, for example, nationality,
Hmm.
age, gender. These things most people, even if they still exist, but they talk about. But here we are talking about other kind of diversity.
Yeah, so diversity in style is one of those things. And I'm sure some people who are listening to this conversation, or people who read the book, have done some kind of personality profiling test that would show some difference in style and personality. But I hope that people see beyond just introversion and extroversion, because that's only one part of personality. There are people who are very structured and organized. There are people who are very chaotic but creative. There's different ways. There are people who are what's called high on emotionality. People get really excited as well as stressed easily, versus people who just, nothing bothers them, but then they can become a little bit dull in some people's eyes because they don't show much excitement either. So there's a whole range of personality traits that can add to the diversity, and different cultures bring different personalities too, but actually individuals in whatever culture they come from, they can be quite different too. So I really hope that people can see beyond that. The
Mm,
other, which is very related to this personality, is diversity in the way we think and the way we process information. The and I think if we don't incorporate that as part of inclusion, you're actually missing out on a lot of business and organizational benefits, because there are people who are very risk taking, or they're
mm,
very bold and they want to get something done, and they're often quite very fast action oriented people, and that's all exciting and good, but you can see the risks if you just followed that and didn't really think through what the consequences might be of a particular decision, or if they just started new things and never finished anything. That can be a great risk for organizations. So you need the balance of people who stand back and go, okay, hang on a minute, we need to think through this, work through what the consequences might be, or think about what could possibly go wrong and what could possibly go right, and balance those things out. So we need people who can think about those things as well and slow down a bit. So I think there's, a mixture of different things that you need, and that's what really brings benefit to organizations. So I do hope that people can see beyond what's visible in terms of diversity.
mm. Megumi, I also noticed that you talked about slow down. You said slowing down and giving space to yourself is part of work, because when you do this, then you can be more effective and energetic and everything. How do usually managers perceive this idea?
Yes, interesting question. So I think it varies. Some managers know that that's what they need to do, but find it really difficult because they have very busy lives and very time poor. So they'll say, yes, yes, I know, and then they don't implement. And then there are people who go, haven't got time for that. We've got so many things to do. So they reject it altogether. And then there's also people who would say, yes, I know, and I will start small and try and put into place some markers or some calendar entries to say, okay, I need to pause, I need to slow down. Some people that I've worked with in the Quietly Powerful program, they have actually taken on board that they do need it, particularly because their nature needs it. So their natural tendency to be quieter and be thoughtful
mm,
requires that space because that's how they become even more effective than rushing everything through, because then firstly they don't feel good about it, but secondly the best ideas don't come when you're rushing.
mm,
So yeah, so
mm,
I think some of those people who've come to my programs have actually really taken it on board and said, okay, this is what I need to be most effective.
mm. You reminded me of something. I see now the interconnection between different views and experiences. That I had also a coach, a somatic coach. Her name is Bianca, as a guest before, and she talked about that our nervous system, we cannot push
Mm,
it, right?
mm.
So you have to go slow with it. And here you are talking about forcing. I'm thinking here also, do you think that from your experience, there is a link between forcing oneself to be visible and loud and burning out?
Yeah, I would link that to having to be someone that you're not for too
Mm,
long and too outside of your usual character can burn you out. So it's and I learned this through the work that I did with Facet 5, which is a personality profiling tool that I regularly use. And the author of the tool often says it's not that you can't adapt. You know, we're human beings are very adaptable, so we can always
mm,
adapt, especially for a good reason, for a good purpose. But if you did it for too long and all the time and to a great degree, then it's exhausting and you will burn out over time. So yeah,
mm,
for sure.
mm. You work with lots of individuals. You have your own program. Many people read your book. Is there any story from people you know that was transformative you like to share from one of your clients?
Wow. The person that comes to mind actually when you say transformation is somebody who, when she started the program, she was in a place quite depressed and quite um, thinking that she might leave her job. She felt really undervalued. She felt like she wasn't heard, and she
Mm,
really didn't feel like she could bring her best self. And after a while, I didn't see her for a while. So the public program that I run, people come along to group coaching sessions once a month, but in between they do their own work. So there's an online bunch of online materials. So I didn't see her for a while, and she missed a couple of the group coaching sessions. And I was wondering, oh, I hope she's okay. I emailed her a couple of times. And then about 3 or 4 months after, she came to the group coaching program and she looked different. And I thought, who is this? Is this the same person? I checked her name. It's like, yes, it's the same person. And she'd changed roles within the same organization. She found a new role. She found a new team that really appreciated her.
mm,
She found a way to be the best version of herself. She actually listened to a whole lot of interviews that I did of the quietly powerful leaders. And so she got real information about real people working in a way and leading in a way that works for them. And so she took a lot of this on board and then took on a lot of things on board from the course. And she was completely transformed. I was thinking, because she's hardly said anything at the beginning of the program. And now she's telling me all these things about what she's done and all the impact she's having with her role. And yeah, so that was probably transformational from my eyes. And then the feedback she gave me, and I always just amazes me when I get this feedback. She said it was life changing. And it's just so heartwarming when I hear that because I saw it and she felt it. And so
mm.
that would be one of the examples.
And would you like to
Mm.
tell me more about it or tell me what are the things that usually people, after either taking the program, reading your books, having conversation with you, makes them change or have this shift the most?
So the biggest thing, or the biggest first thing that people get is that there's nothing wrong with them.
Mm,
So a lot of quieter people are affected by a bit of stigma around being quieter. So if you think about, let's say somebody's talking about Megumi and you're talking about, let's say you're in an organization and talking about Megumi and how she works and how she performs, and you hear, oh, Megumi does some really good work. She's a bit quiet though. It's not a positive comment, is it?
Mm.
So what comes to mind if somebody said, oh, she's a bit quiet though? What comes to mind for you?
I mean, to be honest, since I read already and I heard you talking about it
Yeah,
before, I will already know what the answer you would expect. But let me think. Yeah, I'm thinking. I'm trying to think that I don't know anything about this. Like this is for the first time
yeah,
hearing. Usually quiet, yeah, calm. Usually passive. I still
yeah,
until now,
passive.
even being aware of it, I still feel like yeah, passive. A bit like
Mm,
I don't want to interfere.
Yes, yes. So passive, reserved. So the words that commonly people share with me are things like passive, reserved, shy, not very confident. They
Mm,
don't have a to add. They're not really they're not very competent because they're not showing their competence or vocalizing what they know. So immediately there's assumptions around somebody being quiet, especially when you describe it in this tone. Oh, she's a bit quiet though. And so I think that's the challenge with people who are quieter. They get stigmatized or that people make assumptions about them. And unfortunately, what can happen is because societally we have this sort of assumption about quietness, that people absorb that information, people absorb the messages. No, even little comments or little phrases. I remember reading an article that said something like, so and so was quiet and shy, yet she was very successful.
mm,
Not even just that yet. So a
mm,
surprise. Oh my God, she's
mm,
quiet and successful. That's crazy. And so that is a little put down. And so, there's something wrong with being quiet. It's often the message that people receive and internalize. And so there's this little background noise, a background voice in the back of the head going, oh, there's something not quite right about me. And I can share with you, when I was running some of these breakfasts very early on in starting this work, I had a mother in the group when we were having a conversation, and she said she had a daughter and a son, both teenagers, and the son was one of those very sporty, popular, gregarious kind of boy. And particularly in Australia, when you're good at sport, people tend to get very popular, particularly boys. And then the daughter was one of the quieter, very academic, thoughtful, reserved types. And this mother in this workshop I was running, she said to me, my daughter one time came to me and she would have been 13 or 14. She said, Mum, what's wrong with me, Mum? Why am I not like my brother?
mhm,
So she had already internalized that there's something wrong.
mm,
And when you think about it, there's absolutely nothing wrong. She's just different. When I heard that, everybody in the room was quite sad and emotional. And so I felt, yep, I need to keep going with this work because people really need to understand that there's a lot of value that comes with different styles, including the quieter ones.
mm. And now you're talking, Megumi. You reminded me of a situation when I was in a meeting
Mhm.
answering questions with my colleague, and there were lots of questions from different participants, let's say, in this meeting, asking
Yes.
both of us. And I remember the first question, she said, I'm gonna answer it. I said, okay. The second question, she said, I'm gonna answer it. And the third question, I felt myself, I had to force myself to feel like I have a value. I'm doing something meaningful in the conversation. And I felt like
Mhm.
even the third question, she could have answered it better. And if I just stayed quiet and calm
Mhm.
and, in my own power, and I know that my presence and just be there and listening,
Mhm.
and talking when I need to talk would have been better.
Mhm.
The rest of the questions, most of them I could answer them better. So the third one, which I just could have just stayed quiet, could have been
Mm.
better if I let the flow go in its normal, natural way.
Mm.
So I think
So
it's
did
very
you
important.
feel
Yeah.
you feel the pressure to say something? Is that what caused you to
Yes.
say something?
Yes.
Mm.
Because
Mm.
in such meetings, I'm perceived as someone who's excited, who's energetic, and
Mhm.
being, just staying still and just listening. I felt
Mm.
I'm losing my value somehow. But when
Oh, wow.
Yeah, but when I listened to many things you were saying before, I was like, oh, maybe this is something. This is something. And that's why I tell you sometimes I cannot define myself quiet or
Mm.
not, because it depends on the situation, it depends on so many
Mhm.
things. But to be
Mm.
strong in your inner self, I think that's how you can bring value to others, right?
Being strong in your inner self and being present so that you can discern when it's useful to say something and when it's not so useful. I think there's what you described there about the pressure to speak up. That's very common in organizational meetings, I find. And what can end up happening is that people are vying for attention and performance rather than value add. And
Mm,
that can be quite unhelpful and unproductive, I find. And some people do it a lot more than others, and then it crowds out some of the wise, quieter voices in the room. And yes, I do find that can be quite unproductive. Sometimes some of the quieter voices are the ones that you really need to hear from, and you crowd them out.
mm,
Mm. I do find though, just on that piece about speaking up, the quieter people that I've worked with, many of them have said some of the most unhelpful pieces of feedback they've received is to speak up more.
mm,
It's because,
mm,
the leaders or the whoever's managing the meeting, they want to hear from these people, which is a good intention, and I think it's
mm,
positive that they want to hear from them, but just giving people feedback saying you need to speak up more, and I just wrote a little article on it, you might have seen it actually, is like, it's blaming them that they haven't spoken up rather than thinking about, well, actually, was there any space? So many quieter people say there's just no space. Everybody's talking on top of each other and there's no way of jumping in. Or it's they feel so much pressure to speak up that they feel anxious that they haven't spoken up, and so they're not present, and therefore
mm.
they can't think of the thing to say. So yeah, there's a few issues around this whole idea of needing to speak up.
And whose responsibility is that now? I'm thinking, because you're talking about talking on top of each other. I noticed this, and I remember also one of the guests I had. She was every time, like most of the times, when I ask her questions, I ask her a question, and she waits for 3 to 5 seconds before answering. In the beginning, I it was a bit like it was a surprise for me, like, and then by time I understood this is the way that she makes sure that she is saying something valuable. She wants to take some time
Uh-huh,
for herself before answering. But when you
uh-huh.
talk about meetings, it's sometimes there's no chance to have these 3 to 5 seconds, right? So who's
Yes.
responsible to give this space usually? And
Mm,
how can
mhm.
you advise your clients to make sure that they listen to everyone?
So it's the responsibility lies with both the individuals and whoever's leading the meeting, whether there's a chair or a facilitator or a leader of the team, um, because you can't do one and not the other. But I think the leader or the chair can really set the tone that helps. That right from the beginning to say that we do want to hear from everybody. That at times you might pause, actually create the space and say, let's pause, let's hear from people we haven't heard from yet. So you can facilitate that. But then if the quieter members of that group just don't say anything, then that can also be, problematic. So the quieter individuals also need to work on either their internal chatter about, oh, is this good enough, etc. There's a lot of things that can get in the way from people speaking up. So working on that internal dialogue, that's something that I do quite a lot in the programs that I run. Or it could be just getting clear on what to say and how to say things, communication skills in that sense. Developing that is also very helpful. So I think it takes both, and
mm.
it's not one or the other, it's both.
And since you talked about this inner voice, let's say, or inner critic,
Mm,
I
mm,
know many who, and especially recently, I've been talking to many of my friends and colleagues, also uh, the also students, I mean learners from the MBA I'm taking. They have so many great ideas, and
mhm,
they are, everyone is unique, of course, but they are so like very creative, and they have so many solutions for things they are working on. And they, when it comes to personal branding or like kind of posting on social media or sharing, either writing or any other way of communicating, they have lots of doubts. And
mm.
actually, I'm gonna send them this video after, because I told them that we're gonna talk about this. So what advice would you give to them? Like, how can they be visible in their own unique way without
Mhm.
fear of judgment?
Okay. Yeah, so there's lots of different reasons why someone may not be visible. So there might be fear of judgment. Maybe they just feel a bit shy. Maybe they've had some conditioning and upbringing where they were told you're not supposed to brag. You're not supposed to seek attention. I certainly, my Japanese cultural background, it's very much about blending in and do not stand out. So
Mm,
there's that. So there's lots of reasons why somebody might be like that. And I remember some of the people that I coached had Pacific Islander background, and they also said, oh, never brag. That's a real no-no in their culture. So that was very much a thing that they had to grapple with. And so what I share with people around visibility is that it's not just about social media. I mean, people often think of visibility as about being, bragging and talking about yourself on social media. That's just one form of visibility. And also, even within social media, if you pay attention, you'll see different types of sharing. So some people share about themselves and their achievements and all of these things, which has its place. And if done in a humble and informative way, I think that can be quite useful. But what I would suggest some of your friends and colleagues to think about is how can you share something useful rather than come from the place of I'm bragging about myself, if that makes sense. So you're doing it to be of service rather than doing it for me.
mm,
And of course, ultimately it does benefit you, but you're actually trying to be helpful to other people. And I think that changes the tone, it changes the way you share.
mm,
And then beyond social media, visibility is about connecting with people. So really
mm,
finding who are the people who would benefit from what the ideas that you have, finding them and sharing your ideas. That's a way of becoming visible, of course. And sometimes if you find people who really like your idea, they'll start talking about your idea to other people. That's another form of visibility. So you don't have to do the talking, but other people will do it for you. And I personally experienced that so much and really appreciate that. I know lots of my colleagues who have told other people about my book and my work, and so I haven't had to do as much of the self promotion and so on, and that's been amazing. So yeah, I think if you work on being helpful, I
mm,
think that makes a big difference. And I
mm,
always try and do that because, as you can imagine, I don't like being the center of attention. I don't
mm,
like all eyes on me, but I do put things on social media and I do public speaking, all of that because
mm.
I said to myself, if this information or if this talk can help one person, then it's worth it. That's how I always remind myself.
I would like to hear more from you, Megumi, about this, especially how can you be the center of attention without being the center of attention? Like it can be, for example, and you know what I mean, like talking to so many people, public speaking or anywhere, social media, etc. And for me, it helped me also because I also went on a Toastmaster journey, maybe, you know, so it's also about public speaking. And
Mhm.
the the more I think about the message, and the more I think about what do I want others to feel, you know,
Mhm.
the more I feel people get engaged more. I feel
Mhm.
relaxed. And
Mhm.
whenever I feel like I'm anxious, I don't feel comfortable, etc., then I notice, okay, I came back to myself. I'm thinking about myself. How do I look like? So
Mhm.
how can you be aware always to go out of yourself kind of?
Oh, you described it beautifully, actually, about how if you shift your attention from me to whoever you're speaking to, it makes a big difference. So when you're focused on what are people getting, are they finding it useful? Is there something else that will be helpful? How are they feeling? You know, so the attention is on them. Then, then you have no space for in your brain to worry about yourself. And so I know when I do my best talks or my best workshops, I almost forget that I'm there.
Mm,
It's like I've disappeared. And so I know it sounds really strange, but there
mm,
have been times when I've felt like I wasn't there. And that's
mm,
because my energy is so much with the group and about the group that at the end I go, oh, where was I? So if you can achieve that, you know, that doesn't happen all the time, but that is, I think that's what you would call a flow state or a, you know, highly
mm,
interested group and so on. And, you know, I
mm,
certainly don't get there all the time, but I think the discipline is always about attention on others and the group. And in order to catch that, I think it's about awareness. You know, if you catch yourself going, oh, you know, how am I coming across and starting to worry, to be able to catch it, go, hang on, Megumi, you're starting to think about me again.
mm.
Let's just pause and shift gear.
And are there practices that you do, for example, before going on a public speaking event that helps you, yeah, be like that, be present when you, and also you said your energy, you don't feel that you are lose yourself kind of, you said the being in flow, and then your energy is already on the group.
Mm. So practices, it's not even a practice that I do before a speaking engagement. It's just a practice that I do full stop, which is meditation. I don't think I could do what I do without my regular meditation. And
Mm,
I've been doing it for 25 years, maybe. And I uh, I know the difference it's made over that long period of time because I remember I used to get so nervous in front of a group. I still remember some of my earlier workshops where I had to facilitate and I was shaking. I was all sweaty in my hands and it wasn't great. And yeah, the attention was all on me. It's like, oh my God, I'm going to forget the content I'm meant to share. I didn't say the right thing. People are getting disengaged. So there's all these talks in my head. It's all
mm,
about me. And so, you know, I just didn't have the skills nor the awareness that I built through meditation to be able to catch it and shift it.
mm,
So it's a long-term investment for me to cultivate that self-awareness. Not people often think about self-awareness as about knowing yourself and who you are and things like that. There's another level of self-awareness that I think is really important, which is about awareness in the moment.
mm,
So as we're speaking now, how aware are you of your state, your how you're feeling, the little chatter in the head, etc., in the moment, and can you make conscious choices around that? That's a different level of self-awareness than how well do you know yourself?
Mm. And when you talk about meditation, is there time that you put for yourself, or you just like as much as you need? And when do you do it? In the morning, the evening? I'm curious to know how do you do it?
Yeah, so I try to do it in the morning. Yeah, so when I was very, very disciplined, very early on in my leadership and culture training and development work, because I was so nervous about facilitation and so on, I really thought, okay, I really need to work on this. So I used to meditate twice a day, every day. So first thing in the morning and not quite last thing, but close to the last thing every day. And that made a big difference. But now I do all sorts of different kinds of meditation, and if I can fit it in, first thing in the morning is when I do it.
One thing that I read in your book is the difference between loneliness and solitude. How
Yeah.
important it is, you see, to bring awareness to professionals to differentiate between the two.
Yeah, that's a really interesting question because I enjoy my own company and I don't find that to be lonely until I think about what people normally do and how much they socialize and think, oh, I don't do that much. Or,
Mm,
there are certain times that I do and certain times that I don't. And so it's almost like socially conditioned to think that maybe I should be lonely. so it's an interesting distinction. I think I hope that it can help people when they do feel lonely to just check and go, am I actually lonely or am I alone?
mm,
And I'm okay with that because, there's so much talk about the loneliness epidemic. And I'm sure there's genuine loneliness, and I don't discount that at all. But I wonder some portion, and I've got no idea what proportion, but I'm sure there's a proportion who, if they really thought about it, they're quite okay being alone.
mm,
And so it's only a social conditioned feeling or thought to go, oh, I'm lonely, but maybe they're not.
mm,
And wouldn't that be helpful if, we're talking about a loneliness epidemic? Because when the reason why I think that, and I think it's important, is because I know personally I've felt this, but I know other people have felt this as well, where you're with people, but you feel lonely,
mm,
right?
mm,
It's
mm.
actually not about being with other people necessarily. So you
It
can be alone.
happens.
You can be
Uh,
alone and completely happy, which I often do feel that.
it happens the most for me when I'm in parties. I mean, not always, but
Oh, yeah.
in parties, like everyone. But if I don't feel this connection, then I feel I'm alone. And the other
Yeah.
way around is when I'm meditating, often I feel I'm connected with everyone.
Yes. 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 For sure. So that's not loneliness, is it?
Mm,
That's just simply being alone and solitude and, you feel connected. So, yeah, I would hope that people who feel lonely just check which one it is. And then secondly, if they still do feel like they're lonely, whether there's different ways that they can connect with themselves and the wider world. Not necessarily have to be with other people. I do worry sometimes when people talk about this loneliness epidemic and how people force people to come out and socialize, and because that might add to the loneliness because they don't feel connected even if they're with people.
mm, mm,
So exactly as you say, if people can find that place where they feel connected to everything, then yeah, I think we can resolve quite a bit.
mm. And there is something else you mentioned as a value, being humble, right? How can we value this more? Because usually I find in workplaces, as you said, it's like sometimes it's something that's not appreciative. When you are
Mm,
humble, when you say, I don't know, for example, no, it's you have to have an answer. You are doing
mhm.
this, then you have to find the way. You cannot say, I don't know, or
Mhm.
I will learn about it, for example.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, it's I don't know whether you've seen leaders who say, I don't know and I need your help and I don't know everything. I find that to be one refreshing, but secondly, that it opens up the potential for the team to bring more of themselves and more contribution. So it actually, I think, raises the collective intelligence when leaders are humble. And I think if organizations start to understand that they raise the collective intelligence, then perhaps there's a way to value it more. And humility doesn't mean that you say, I don't know all the time either. It's just being realistic that I know some things, but don't know
Uh,
everything.
uh,
That's just reality. Like nobody knows everything anyway. So why pretend that we do? So there's this pretense of being the know-it-all or the pretense of being very smart and all of that. That doesn't help them nor anybody actually. So I think that balanced humility, if you like, be humble and say, I don't know about some things, but then be very confident and okay about the things that you do know. I think
uh.
that's the way that you can really balance it out.
While you are listening to the Core Impact podcast, please take a moment to pause and share with me. How do you feel? Are you enjoying the conversation, feeling inspired, or something else? I would love to know your feelings in the comments. That it is more critical than ever before to attract, retain, and engage diverse talents.
Mhm.
How do you see this awareness evolving among leaders?
How is it evolving? I see two sides. It's interesting you raise this point because I've had conversations with some colleagues lately about it. There's some people who say, "Oh, diversity, inclusion, and equity, and all of that's rubbish. It's or meritocracy all the way." And I feel like there's also the other side of, oh, it's so important from a business perspective or organizational perspective, but also from a fairness perspective. And I feel like it's kind of split. There's nowhere somewhere. There's not many people in the middle or the in between. And I wonder whether that's actually damaging this whole idea of diversity and inclusion, where
Um,
actually perhaps there's both sides are right in some ways, and perhaps there's them both missing something as well. Where if you're saying, meritocracy all the way and diversity and inclusion's rubbish, there might, and I do see this from time to time, there might be aspects of how diversity and inclusion is done in organizations that are probably not helpful. And I've heard that from people who are even supporters of diversity and inclusion. Think people feeling like they're a token hire or a token appointment. That's not helpful at all. And the person who's appointed don't feel great. The people who are surrounding them don't feel great. And the people who, if it was a woman appointed and it was they wanted to fill in a role with a woman, that person doesn't feel great. The team doesn't feel great and women in general don't feel great because it's like, oh, we don't want to be the token. So that doesn't help. So there's definitely something right about this complaint about diversity and inclusion. But then there's the other side of, yes, absolutely, there's people who have got to where they got to. They got promoted and they got selected and so on, because they're talented, they worked hard, etc. And that's true. And they also had some privilege
uh,
because they had access to the right people, they had the right education, access to funds to get the right education, the right schools, etc. So I think it's both. It's so I hope we could evolve where we can look at both and say, okay, well, there's definitely some improvements we can make on both ends
uh,
that, we give access or we make sure that people do have opportunities and also expect high quality and hard work and all of the things that we want from meritocracy.
uh,
I might also add to meritocracy in some ways has its flaws, because what we define as merit is flawed from the perspective of what I talk about in Quietly Powerful. We assume that somebody who appears confident is competent, which is quite incorrect. And I've written about this so often, where I don't know whether you've come across Dr. Thomas Shamara-Premozic. Have you heard of him? He wrote some interesting books, and one of them is "Why Do So Many Incompetent Men Become Leaders?" and how to fix it. And it's no offense to men at all. He's a man, and he wrote this because he really spoke to similar things to what I'm speaking about, which is the appearance of confidence, the appearance of charisma, the appearance of the self focus or self absorption gets the attention and gives the impression that they're competent, yet they're not necessarily the best leaders. Sometimes they are, but not always the best leaders, but they get the most attention. And that's dangerous from many aspects because, according to Dr. Thomas, he looked at a study where it said the overlap between confidence and competence is not that high. Can you guess what percentage did overlap between confidence and competence?
I I have I have to look to the study to to understand more about it before I guess. But you just give a number,
Yeah,
27%.
yeah. It's 9.
Whoa.
Exactly. I was shocked too when I first read it.
Hmm.
So when I thought about it, though, it makes sense because the overlap is where confidence and competence matches. And what Dr. Thomas says is confidence is your own perception of your competence, and competence is actual competence measured by whatever measure that you have for that competence. And so there are plenty of people who overestimate their competence, so they're overconfident. And there are also plenty of people who are underconfident, so they're very competent, but they don't feel as competent, therefore they're underconfident. So if you add those together, it's 91%. So there's a big danger in assuming somebody coming across as confident as being competent.
And here, are we talking about, let's say, pretending to be confident, or this feeling, like this actual? How can you explain it more? What does it
Mm,
what does it mean to be confident in this
mm.
context?
I think I would say um, yeah, no, that's a really good nuanced question because I see confidence in different ways as well, where there's the outward projection of confidence. You know, a lot of people who are outspoken and dominant, they display a sense of confidence, but they're not always confident on the inside. And I've known people like that who appear to be confident, but I give them a tiny little piece of feedback and they get defensive and they say, they start to attack you and things. So there's something not so confident on the inside. So there's that. And then there's also people who are confident on some things, but not on other things. And they might pretend to be confident on the things that they're not necessarily confident in. So there's that. While as what you're alluding to is the inner confidence that in some degrees, in some ways, I describe it as comfort or comfortable within yourself. So that's one of the elements I talk about with quietly powerful leaders, that their sense of confidence is just being comfortable with the fact that they are strong in some areas and not so strong in other areas, and they're okay with that. And that I feel is like an inner confidence that even if you don't know everything or even if you're not great at everything, you'll be okay and you'll work things out and you'll ask for help and you'll be okay. So there's different versions. It's a really good question.
Thank you, Megumi. There's another thing that I'm interested to know about from you, because you also talked about intuition and how important it is. And recently, I noticed there are some studies that show that gut feeling decisions can unintentionally create bias.
Mhm.
At the same time, intuition is important. So, how can leaders find a balance between intuition and structured fairness?
And what, sorry? Structured
Structured fairness.
structured fairness. Hmm.
Mm.
Okay. Is this
So,
is this in yeah? No, you go.
we're talking about inclusion.
Uh-huh.
We can talk about not like inclusion in the big picture, let's say.
Yeah.
For example, hiring decisions.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So in that context, I think because it involves human beings and judgment of human beings, um, intuition, if you're not careful, it can be full of biases for sure. And maybe there's a distinction between intuition and gut feeling and, all of that.
Mm,
Um, because I think there's intuition that can be helpful. For example, if you just have a funny feeling that that person isn't being honest or something like that, you want to listen to that kind of thing. But I
mm,
think the final judgment, though, you have to really combine a whole lot of different things. Um, but the challenge, I think, though, is that it's really difficult not to be biased. Like you and
mm,
I will be biased in certain ways, of course, because of the way we are, the way we think, the way we see the world, our past experiences. So I'm sure I would avoid certain types of people in hiring decisions and, might get a little glimpse of that and go, oh no, not that person. Um, yeah, so it's tricky. I think the way that you might challenge yourself is to ask lots of questions
mm,
to yourself to say, how do I know? How do I know that? And what evidence did I see? And ask other people, what did you see? Because guarantee other people see different things, even though you're in the same room. So I think from a hiring and inclusion perspective, it's really important to have other people and challenge yourself. Because I can also see how, in the context of someone who comes in and, maybe the quieter one, that people assume, but, not very good first impression. Maybe they seem a little anxious, or maybe
mm,
they stumble on a few words at the beginning, but actually they're really deep in terms of substance and expertise, and if the interviewers are not very good at asking good questions and creating the environment where you can get the best out of that person, then is it their fault or is it the interviewer's fault?
mm,
So yeah, I think there's a lot more to it than just saying, well, I have a gut feel.
mm. There is something, Megumi, I'm learning from you, for example, to see a different perspective of inclusion, right? So we talked about this in the beginning, like diversity, inclusion. First thing you think about nationality, you think about gender,
Mhm.
you think about age.
Okay.
Now you think about, okay, different personalities, as you're saying. Is there anything else that you could surprise me with another perspective of unconscious bias that leads to making decisions in hiring and other things also, like how we can exclude people without noticing.
Mhm. Mhm. I think there's lots, and so for example, how somebody comes in, the first impression, we get so influenced by the first impression,
Mm,
and so that could be to do with their style, but it could also be to do with how they dressed,
mm, mm,
right? So it might be a certain style that somebody comes in as in terms of how they dress, and that might make, you might start to make assumptions about how they are simply because of that, and that whole assumption making is it happens so quickly that we don't
mm,
catch it.
mm.
And I think that's the danger. And I'm not sure whether you've come across this idea called the ladder of inference. Have you heard of that? The ladder
No.
of influence is a good framework to remind yourself how quickly we make those assumptions. It's
Mm,
basically a ladder. So down the bottom is the pool of data. So data is anything that's observable, anything that everybody would agree exists. And you know, say for example, let's talk about somebody walking into a room for an interview. Everybody would agree that person has a red shirt. It's observable,
mm,
right? So that will be data. But then the next run up the ladder is we select and deselect some data. So for some people, the red shirt is the first thing that they see. Other people may not even see it, and they look at their posture, something else, what they say. So we select and deselect data just simply because we're so biased. And then the next rung up the ladder is we make interpretations based on the data that we select. So one person might be looking at that person going, "Oh, red shirt, that's really loud." You know, why would they
mm,
wear that in an interview? So there's a judgment coming in, that interpretation. It's very unprofessional, etc. And then the other person who didn't even notice the red shirt will be going, "Oh, you know, they sound really confident and they feel they're saying really positive things." And so they might have completely different interpretations. And the final rung of the ladder is you take action based on what you assumed and made interpretations. You base it on your own conclusions, which may be completely different from other people. So
mm,
it's a very very dangerous pattern that we we find ourselves in as human beings.
mm. I find it liberating, to be honest. Like it's
Yeah.
in the beginning, it's scary. It's scary to think about, oh, am I really like this? Sometimes, like in the beginning, I don't want to even hear this stuff. Like, I don't want to know how
Uh-huh.
biased I am, because it's very confrontational. But then when you know about it, it's liberating because then you can go really deep uh, inside and then know other people as much as you can without judgment.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And I think that's the
Uh,
key. If you know that we're all biased, then what can I do to de-bias as much as you can? And you can't completely get rid of it, but and I think the key thing here is to be curious.
mm,
You know, someone with a red shirt comes in and you have this little judgment, you know, how dare they? That's so loud. It's like going into a nightclub. That person might go, "Oh, I wonder why they chose to wear a red shirt today." Just open up to the possibility they might have a good reason for it.
mm.
So I think that curiosity and being open to difference and different possibilities is the antidote to this bias.
Another question I would like to ask you now about the future is what trends do you see shaping organizational culture over the next 5 to 10 years?
Wow, that's a tough question. I say tough question because I think it varies from place to place, and I'm sure I don't have all the answers. But the one trend that I would touch on is the generational trend.
Mm,
So what I can see and hear from the younger people, and I include my daughter who's 19 now, and she's started to work in, you know, casual work for different places. And the way she talks about what she likes and what she doesn't like is very clear. And there's something that I think younger people are expecting, which is to be given a bit more ownership and a sense of purpose around
mm,
what they do, rather than just being given tasks to do. And you know, if there's no meaning, if there's no sense of being valuable and feeling valued, I think people do switch off quite quickly.
mm.
And part of it, I think, could be that their attention spans are a bit shorter than ours as well. I think the younger generation, they've lived on TikTok and things, so every 3 seconds they need something. I'm generalizing here. But there's definitely something about feeling valued. So my daughter, 19-year-old daughter, she works for, she has two jobs. One of the jobs she has is with, I don't think you would have heard, but it's a company, it's called Yochi. It's a frozen yogurt like you can get it in stores. And she was invited. So she's a casual. She only works say 10 hours a week or something, but she got invited to uh, a company-wide meeting with all the senior leaders and permanent staff and everything. Obviously, because they're spread out in the country, if this was the Melbourne meeting. And she didn't get paid, but she got food and everything else. And she was quite excited to go to it because it was like, oh, I get to learn about the strategy reset and why they're doing what they're doing. They're asking for suggestions to make improvements, so they're willing to listen to her, all of these things. And so, yeah, she came home and talked to me about all the things that they did, and there was quite a lot of energy. And so I felt like, that's the sort of thing that young people almost expect. And if you didn't have any of that and you get sat in a corner to do some tasks, I think you'll lose people.
mm, mm,
And so I think leaders, particularly, I'm coming back to the quietly powerful leaders who listen are going to be really important. The worst thing you can do to a young person is to ignore them or not listen to them.
mm. Thank you very much, Megumi. I have now an open question to you. Is there anything you think it's important that we haven't talked about yet?
Good question. I think one thing I would like to highlight is the book Quietly Powerful often gets people assume that it's about introversion.
Mm,
And I really want to debunk that because people assume that somebody who's quiet is an introvert, and that's not always the case. And not all introverts are quiet either. So it's we tend to oversimplify people and human beings are much more complex than introvert extrovert for one, but also introvert extrovert either can be quiet from time to time. It could be another aspect of personality, like emotionality I mentioned earlier. People who get anxious, even if they're an extrovert, they worry and therefore they don't say something in a work context. Or it could be that they're very sensitive, so they get overwhelmed by too much noise and too many people. And so, and I know somebody who's an extrovert and highly sensitive, and so she goes quiet in a big meeting. Um, but then there's also not just personality, but there's cultural conditioning or cultural background that can play out. So, as you know, my Japanese background, many Asian cultures, kids are brought up to be seen, not heard. Even in school, I remember in school in Japan when I was there, and I moved between Australia and Japan as a kid. So when I went to Japan, after being in school in Australia for a little bit, the teacher asked a question of the classroom, and I put my hand up, and everybody's going, "What is she doing?" Because you're not supposed to do that. And I
mm,
didn't know. So there's something about just being quiet is the norm, not standing out is a cultural norm. So that can play a part in people being quieter. It could be a certain upbringing. Some families or even religions can cause us to be to think in certain ways and behave in certain ways. Of course, there's power dynamics in any group. I know if you're the only woman or if you're the only person of color, if you're the only this, that, the other, it can be harder to speak up. If you're the only person with a certain opinion, it can be very difficult to bring it up. So there's lots of reasons why people can be quiet and not say what they need to say. So I
mm,
think it's really important to understand that, as well as understand that the quietness, wherever it comes from, and I include people who are normally extroverted, loud, etc., they can also access their quiet side as well. So we all have it, and it's
mm,
just about valuing more of that in our world. That seems to be quite noisy.
mm. Megumi, I'm thinking about a question, unconditional question. Is there any question that you are thinking about or something you are searching for or curious to know more about that you'd like me to ask and like the right person in the next podcast about it? A question that you're curious about.
Oh, wow. What am I curious about? I'm curious about lots of things. Um, well, I think the one that I often ask other people, particularly the quietly powerful leaders, is what do you think it'll take for organizations to really start valuing diversity of style and thought in leadership?
Mm, mm.
That will be a question that I'd love to hear other people talk about.
Thank you very much, Megumi. I really enjoyed the conversation. I enjoyed
Thank you.
the calmness of the conversation and the energy you brought. Of course, there were lots of things that I was curious to know more about, and there were other things that you surprised me also with. We talked about, I think, many topics that I can highlight now. But for example, the solitude and loneliness, which is a big topic. We talked about how to be visible as a quiet person, lots of misconceptions about being quiet, and we dive into deep discussions about diversity, inclusion, non-judgmental thinking. So thank you very much, Megumi. Is there anything you like to say in the end now? There's no question.
Thank you. No, I really enjoyed the questions that you asked me. It got me thinking as well. So I really appreciated the conversation. And yeah, if anybody's interested in finding out more about Quietly Powerful, please feel free to get in touch with me. I'm active on LinkedIn, so you'll find me. I don't think there's anybody else called Megumi Miki on LinkedIn yet, so it won't be very hard to find me. And also the quietlypowerful.com.au. So the AU at the end, that's the website about Quietly Powerful. So I'd love to hear because I really enjoy talking about this topic with people, and I hope more people can challenge this idea of what good leadership looks, sounds, and feels like. So thank you so much for having me, and I really enjoyed the conversation too.
Thank you, Megumi. I enjoyed too, and we stay in touch. I'm gonna also put the links in the description.
Great.
Thank
Thank you
you.
so much.